And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Well, tonight's weather chart shows 3 low pressure areas here. The stronger one here just south of the eastern North Gulf Coast, pushing a good trough into the Panhandle, keeping breezy conditions with wet weather from the Queen Charlotte's right on up into about Yakutat and Cordova. And then some precipitation across the southern Kenai Peninsula, southern Cook Inlet, Barren Islands, and that linking up with an area of light snow covering areas from the Seward Peninsula associated with this 994 millibar low over the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, with mixed precipitation in the northern Bristol Bay, showers mostly of rain for the Alaska Peninsula, and the low out here to the west, keeping a few showers here over the Aleutians, and some light snow from St. Lawrence Island, also some light snow continuing for the north slope and the Arctic coast. And for tomorrow, low pressure pulls back to the west-northwest in right over south central Alaska, the northern Kenai Peninsula area. It's going to start to increase the moisture from east to west here in toward Turnagain Arm in the form of rain or snow, rain right along the coast, showers for the Panhandle, and then areas of light snow here from the western Alaska Range across the Kuskokwim Valley up into the southern Seward Peninsula. Still some light snow over the Yukon Flats, as well as the north slope in the Arctic coast through the Bering Strait to St. Lawrence Island. Not much change out over the Bering Sea. That low still anchored out there over the western areas there with some showers mainly from Adak, western Deshimia, and Attu. Then on the day Monday, much stronger system pulls up to Unalaska Island in the afternoon with gale and storm force winds around that with gusts of 50 to 70 miles per hour, pushing into Bristol Bay and eventually Kodiak Island. Otherwise, southern central part of the state, pretty quiet with some clearing and light winds. Still some scattered snow showers over the northeast part of the state. Most of the snow mostly off the coast now from the northern Bering Sea, maybe around St. Lawrence Island, but really to the west of the coast and still grazing the central Arctic coast with a few flurries and a lot of showers over the Panhandle there, especially to the south. Coastal water forecast, small craft advisories for the coastal areas for west-southwest winds at 25 knots for Sunday with seas kind of on the high side, anywhere from 19 to 24 feet. South winds 25 knots there for Lynn Canal, same thing for Stevens Passage, and Clarence Strait, southeast winds 15 knots with 11-foot seas. And then for the day on Monday, Lynn Canal, Stevens Passage, northwest at 10, Clarence Strait, northwest at 15 knots. Northwest winds 15 to 20 knots on the south coast and northwest at 15 for the central coast. And the north coast down to 10 knots from the north and northeast with seas 8 to 10 feet. Prince William Sound, variable winds at 10 knots for the day Sunday. Seas only at about 2 feet. Small craft advisories for the North Gulf Coast. Variable to east winds at 25 to 30 knots. Variable winds, Cook Inlet 10 to 20 knots. West at 20 knots for Kamishak Bay, and small craft advisories for the Barren Islands. West winds 25 knots. Outlook for Monday. Still variable winds 10 to 15 knots for Cook Inlet. West 25 knots for Kamishak Bay and the Barren Islands. Western North Gulf Coast, west winds or north winds at 20 knots. East at 10 for Prince William Sound. Eastern North Gulf Coast, variable winds at 10 to 15 knots. And for Kodiak Island on Sunday, west winds 25 knots. The Alaska Peninsula, west winds 15 to 20 knots. And west to 20 knots there for Bristol Bay. Big increase in those winds with that storm coming up to the eastern Aleutians. Gale and storm force winds for the Alaska Peninsula from the east and southeast 45 to 50 knots. East at 40 knots for Bristol Bay, seas 5 feet, and Kodiak Island, south winds 25 knots. Eastern Aleutians tomorrow, variable to southwest winds at 10 to 15 knots. Southwest 15 knots for Adak, Atka, Amchitka Island, Kiska to Shimia, northwest winds at 15 knots. And then for Monday, gale and storm force winds come into the eastern Aleutians, anywhere from 45 to 55 knots, northwest at 40 knots for Adak and Atka, and northwest winds 30 or 25 to 35 knots for the western Aleutians. Southwest coast tomorrow, northwest winds 10 to 15 knots, southwest 15 for the Pribilofs, North at 15, St. Matthew Island. And for the Yukon Delta coast and St. Lawrence Island, north to northwesterlies at 10 knots. And for Monday, east at 10 for Norton Sound, otherwise south to southeast winds, 15 knots for the Yukon Delta coast, St. Lawrence Island. Gales come into the Kuskokwim Delta coast. They're east at 40 knots. Pribilof, storm warnings, northeast at 50 knots. And for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast tomorrow, actually the entire coastline, the entire Arctic coast, east winds 25 to 30 knots, so seas running 6 to 7 feet. And then some gale warnings here for the Point Hope, Cape Lisburne area, northeast winds 35 knots there, and then the Chukchi Sea northeast at 20. Chukchi Sea on Monday, east-northeast at 15 knots. Western Arctic coast, east-northeast at 25, and for the eastern and central coast, east winds at 20 to 25 knots.